I never imagined waking up one morning to a truth I wasn't ready to face. The city outside my window was quiet, the streets washed in the soft light of dawn, but inside my chest, everything was loud, louder than the chaos of any city I had ever walked through. I had thought love was simple, even in our differences. I thought Gianna and I were invincible, that nothing could shake the bond we had built. Little by little, over months that felt like a lifetime. But that morning, her smile, the one that used to make the world feel warm, felt like a mask. And I realized, in the cold silence of our apartment, that she had been hiding something from me. Something that wasn't just a secret, but a betrayal that would change everything. I tried to shake the thought away, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was pride, maybe paranoia. But deep down, I felt an gnawing certainty I could no longer ignore. Gianna, the woman I had trusted with my heart, was carrying a child that wasn't mine. I remember the way the sunlight fell across the kitchen counter that morning, glinting off the silver utensils, and how every tiny reflection seemed to mock me. The coffee kettle whistled softly, a sound that had once been comforting, now deafening in its familiarity. I reached for my mug, my hands trembling, and I wondered how I had missed all the signs, the late calls, the unexplained absences. Moments when her eyes flickered away from mine, just for a second, and I didn't notice. It wasn't just the secret that hurt. It was the slow, creeping realization that everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and loyalty could be wrong. And in that moment, with the city waking up outside and my world quietly crumbling inside, I felt something I hadn't felt before. The raw, piercing ache of betrayal. I had always believed that love could survive anything. But now, staring at the morning light, I understood that some truths are heavy enough to break even the strongest hearts. And as I whispered her name into the silence, I didn't know if I was calling her, or calling for the life I thought we were building together. My name is Xavier. I've never had much in life, just a small apartment on the edge of the city, a steady job that barely covered the rent, and a stubborn sense of pride that kept me going. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, and I certainly didn't live the life most people dreamed of. But I had something that felt priceless at the time: love. Gianna came into my life like sunlight through a dusty window. She was everything I wasn't: elegant, polished, confident. She moved in a world of mansions, high-rise offices, and champagne evenings that I could barely imagine. Her father, Mr. Jason, was a billionaire, a man who could command fleets of luxury cars, properties across the country, and yet I sensed there was a gentleness in her world that most people never saw. That gentleness was what drew me in. I met her at a small cafe near the city's old district, a place she claimed to love because it reminded her of simpler times. She was sitting by the window, her hair catching the sunlight, her laughter spilling into the quiet morning air. I remember tripping over my own words when she asked if she could join my table. Of course, I had stammered, trying to act like I belonged in her world, though I knew I didn't. From that day on, we became inseparable in our own quiet way. We walked through crowded streets, talking about dreams that seemed worlds apart, hers, filled with ambition and wealth, mine with small hopes and honest work. She didn't care about the modest apartment I lived in or the faded furniture I could barely afford. She cared about me, and for a time, that was enough. But love is never just about the heart. It's about the spaces between people, the silence, the unspoken words, the compromises we make without realizing. Gianna and I shared laughter, meals, and long walks through the city's parks. She would tell me stories of her father, Mr. Jason, and the empire he had built, stories full of power and prestige. I listened, sometimes intimidated, sometimes amazed. But I also felt a quiet admiration for the man who had raised her, even if I would never meet him casually. Gianna had a presence that made people notice her, but she reserved her warmth for me. She would brush my hair from my forehead when I was tired, leave small notes on my table, and sometimes just sit beside me in silence, letting me feel her closeness. Those moments made me believe that our love could bridge any gap between wealth and poverty, between worlds that seemed so different, yet even in those perfect mornings and quiet evenings, there were shadows. I noticed her phone buzzing in. The night, the way she sometimes stiffened when I asked about her day. I shrugged it off, telling myself that everyone had secrets, everyone had pasts. But deep down, There was a whisper I tried to ignore, a sense that life was more complicated than I had imagined. Her father, Mr. Jason, occasionally appeared in our lives. He was commanding, yet calm, with a presence that filled every room. He didn't need to raise his voice. You could feel his authority in a glance, in a gesture. He liked me in his own way, but I knew he measured me against a standard I could never reach. And yet he never treated me as an outsider. At least, not openly. For months, it felt like our love was a fragile bridge over two worlds. We leaned on each other, laughed together, and dreamed together. I believed that no matter what storms came, we could survive them. I believed in her, in us. But sometimes, even the strongest bridges have cracks that are invisible until they grow into chasms. And in my quiet apartment, sipping my morning coffee as the city stirred awake, I had no idea that those cracks were already forming, that a storm was quietly gathering over the life I thought I had built with Gianna. At first, it was nothing I could name. A small unease, the kind that creeps into the edges of your heart when something isn't quite right, but you can't put a finger on it. Gianna seemed more distant, her laughter a little lighter, her smiles a little shorter. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things, that love wasn't supposed to be perfect, and perhaps she was just tired from her life, from her father's demands, from her world that I could never fully understand. I remember one evening, sitting in our tiny apartment, the city lights sparkling below like fireflies in a jar. Gianna was unusually quiet. I was making dinner simple pasta, nothing fancy, and I noticed her hand shaking slightly as she stirred her drink. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, trying not to sound like I was accusing her of anything. She looked at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt, but it vanished so quickly that I wondered if my eyes were deceiving me. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes avoided mine. That was the first time I felt the distance, not just physical, but emotional. Weeks passed, and the small moments began to pile up. Calls she wouldn't answer, sudden trips to the city without me, evenings when she seemed preoccupied, staring at her phone as if it held the weight of the world. I noticed her hesitation. When I suggested spending the night together or talking about our future, I chalked it up to stress, to the pressures of her life. But deep down, a whisper in my chest kept saying that love should never feel like this, like walking on eggshells, like trying to catch smoke in your hands. Then came the subtle manipulation. Gianna's words, though always polite, carried a hint of condescension I had never noticed before. She would tease me about my small apartment, the modest furniture, my simple meals. I tried to laugh it off, but each comment felt like a tiny needle pricking at my confidence. I loved her, I truly did, and I wanted to accept her world, to blend into it. But it wasn't hers. I was trying to live it, was ours. Her father, Mr. Jason, seemed to notice the changes too. I could feel his gaze on me during dinners in their mansion, the unspoken questioning in the way he observed me. He never spoke harshly, never raised his voice, but there was an unmistakable weight in the silence between us. I sometimes wondered if he approved of me at all, or if he was silently warning Gianna that someone like me could never belong in their life. And then there was Jace. I had heard her mention him casually once, an old boyfriend from her college days, someone she said she'd outgrown. I tried not to think much of it, but occasionally I caught her staring at her phone with a softness I couldn't place. Once, I saw a name flash across the screen. Gianna. My stomach tightened. I pushed the feeling away. I told myself it was nothing. I trusted her. I had to, but trust is fragile. One evening, as I waited for Gianna in our apartment, she came home late. She was flushed, distracted, and smelled faintly of perfume I didn't recognize. "Sorry," she murmured, avoiding my eyes. "Work ran late." I nodded, pretending to understand, but inside, a storm was brewing. My hands ached to reach for her, to pull her close, to demand the truth, but I stopped. I had promised myself that I would love her quietly, without pressure, without anger. But love can only hold so much silence before it begins to break. Small revelations began to surface in ways I couldn't ignore. A text left open on her phone. A hushed phone call she ended abruptly, the way she sometimes flinched when I touched her hand. The signs were subtle, but they were enough to plant seeds of doubt that grew with every passing day. I started watching her more closely, not out of suspicion, but out of desperation. I wanted to understand her, to find the warmth I remembered in her eyes. Yet, the more I looked, the less I found. Gianna was slowly becoming someone I didn't recognize, a woman caught between loyalty and fear, between love and something else I couldn't name. One night, I followed her quietly when she said she was meeting a colleague at a cafe. From across the street, I saw her laughing too freely, leaning too closely toward a man whose presence made my chest ache. It was Jace. My heart twisted in ways I didn't think were possible. I didn't move, didn't breathe too loudly. I just watched, helpless, as the woman I loved shared smiles and touches with someone else, a man from her past, someone who didn't know the value of my love, someone who didn't see the nights I stayed awake worrying about her. I went home that night in silence. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the city outside, feeling the weight of betrayal press against my ribs. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no accusations, just the quiet, aching realization that the life I thought we were building together was built on something fragile, something that could shatter with a single truth. The tension between us grew in the following weeks. I noticed her subtle withdrawals, her careful wording, the little ways she avoided me when I tried to discuss our future. I began questioning everything I had believed, the laughter, the closeness, the promises whispered in the quiet hours of the night. And yet, despite the growing distance, I couldn't let go. My love for her was stubborn, relentless, even as the cracks widened. Every gesture, every glance, every whispered word became a test of patience. I was trying to hold on to the woman I loved while realizing that love alone might not be enough. And in the stillness of my apartment, as the city lights flickered outside, I felt a profound sorrow of someone who loves deeply but begins to understand that love cannot always prevent heartbreak. It was during this time that the first faint hints of the truth began to appear. A doctor's appointment she forgot to mention, a sudden visit from Mr. Jason, the careful way she handled conversations about the future. The pieces were scattered, like shards of glass I didn't want to touch, yet couldn't ignore. I didn't know the full story, but my heart knew something was coming, revelation that would change everything. And so, I waited, in quiet desperation, not yet ready to face the storm, but knowing it was already forming on the horizon. The day I learned the truth started like any other, with sunlight spilling across the city and the faint hum of morning traffic. But I felt it in my chest, the weight of something I hadn't yet seen but somehow already knew. Gianna was quiet. That morning, her hands trembling slightly as she held her coffee cup. I noticed it, but I thought it was nerves, maybe stress from her father's business. "Xavier," she said softly, her voice a little too measured. "Can we talk?" My heart thudded, a slow drum of apprehension. I nodded, though my hands were clammy. She led me to the couch, sitting down beside me with that same elegance she always carried, but something in her eyes made me flinch. She avoided looking at me directly, as if searching for courage in the carpet. I haven't been honest with you," she began, her hands twisted together in her lap. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago, but I was afraid. Afraid of losing you." I felt a chill rise in my body, fear, confusion. My mind raced through possibilities, each more painful than the last. "Gianna, what is it?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. She took a deep breath, finally meeting my eyes with a softness I barely recognized. I'm pregnant," she said. The words hung in the air, fragile yet heavy. "But it's not yours, Xavier. It's Jace's." The world seemed to tilt, the city sounds outside, the honking, the distant chatter, the faint music from a passing car became muffled, almost unreal. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped iron bands around it. I managed to whisper, disbelief painting my words. "I never meant for this to happen," she continued, tears welling in her eyes. "It was a mistake. Something from my past I thought I had left behind. I tried to hide it because I didn't want to hurt you. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook, my vision blurred. Every memory of our time together, every walk, every laugh, every quiet night seemed tainted, like someone had taken the colors from my world. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to throw the truth back at her, but all I could do was sit there, feeling the crushing weight of betrayal press against my ribs. Then came Mr. Jason. I had called him earlier, unsure if I should confront him or wait. And he arrived, his presence calm, authoritative, yet not unkind. He sat across from me, his eyes never leaving mine. "Xavier," he said softly, "there are things you don't understand. I wanted to protect her, to protect you. But the truth, it's here now." He explained that he had known about Gianna's past with Jace, about the accident that had left her vulnerable, and about the child. He had tried to handle it quietly, hoping it would not ruin the life she was building with me, hoping I would never have to face the pain. "I thought I was helping," he said quietly, "but maybe I only delayed the inevitable." I didn't know how to respond. My heart ached, my mind ached. Every part of me screamed with disbelief and sorrow. I looked at Gianna, her face pale, tears spilling freely, and I felt a deep, unrelenting grief, not just for the betrayal, but for the love I still carried for her, love that refused to die even in the face of this truth. "How could you?" I finally whispered, my voice barely audible. "How could you hide this from me?" "I was scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to lose you, I thought. I thought if I kept it from you I could somehow, I don't know, manage it." I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. Rage and sorrow warred inside me, each one sharp, bitter, unforgiving. But even as the pain threatened to swallow me, a strange clarity emerged. I saw not just the betrayal, but the fear, the mistakes, the human fragility in front of me. Gianna was scared. Mr. Jason had tried to shield us both. Jace, he was a ghost from the past, one I hadn't known would return in such a devastating way. For hours, we sat in silence. Words felt useless, futile against the tidal wave of truth that had broken over us. I wanted to leave, to run from the apartment, from her, from the life I had imagined. But something held me there. Perhaps it was love, or perhaps it was the need to face the truth fully, no matter how painful. In that silence, I realized how deeply I had loved her, not the perfect fairy tale version, but the real, flawed human Gianna. And even though my heart was breaking, I also understood something else. Love isn't about possession. Love isn't about control. Love is about seeing the truth, no matter how devastating, and deciding how to move forward. Mr. Jason left us then, quietly, with the calm dignity I had always admired. He didn't judge me, didn't urge forgiveness, didn't demand retaliation. He simply let the truth settle in the room, letting the silence do the work words could not. And so there we were, Gianna, vulnerable and tearful, and me, broken yet strangely clear. The revelation had shattered my world, yes, but it also brought an unexpected gift, clarity. I could no longer live in illusions, no longer pretend that love could survive secrecy and betrayal unscathed. I had to decide who I was, what I deserved, and how I would carry myself forward in a life that had been irrevocably changed. It was the moment that defined everything that came after. The moment when love and heartbreak collided, when the fragile thread of trust snapped. And yet, in that brokenness, I began to see the first glimmers of strength, of dignity, and of the quiet power that comes from facing truth without losing oneself. The days that followed the revelation were heavy, slow, and almost unbearably quiet. I kept to my apartment, wandering through the small rooms like a ghost, trying to reconcile the life I had imagined with the one I now lived. Gianna came by, sometimes her eyes full of sorrow and regret, but I found I could no longer meet her gaze with the same trust I once had. I loved her, this I could not deny, but love had changed its shape. It had become something quieter, something that weighed heavily on my chest. I remember sitting by the window one evening, watching the city glow with lights that seemed so far away from my life, so unreachable. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, a man who had loved deeply, who had been betrayed, and yet somehow who had survived. The grief was still there, raw and tender, but it no longer threatened to consume me. Grief, I realized, was a companion, not an enemy. It could teach, it could guide, if only I let it. I began to understand what quiet strength really meant. It wasn't in shouting or demanding revenge. It wasn't in punishing someone for the pain they caused. It was in walking through heartbreak, with dignity, in allowing the truth to exist, without letting it define who I was entirely. I decided that I would not let anger consume me, would not let betrayal twist my soul. I would feel the pain, yes, but I would also rise above it. Gianna and I spoke, slowly, cautiously. She apologized, over and over, her voice trembling with each word. I listened because I needed to hear it, but I did not allow myself to be swept away by tears or guilt. "I understand," I said one evening, my voice calm, steady. "I don't know if I can forgive everything, not yet, but I hear you. And I need to be honest too, my heart is broken, Gianna. I need time, and I need space to rebuild myself." She nodded, and in that moment, I realized that part of loving someone, even after betrayal, is allowing them the chance to understand the depth of what they've done without letting it destroy you. I was beginning to reclaim my own heart, piece by piece, learning that self-respect and love could coexist even in the shadow of pain. Mr. Jason reached out again, not to explain or to excuse, but to simply check in. "Xavier," he said one evening, "life has a way of testing people in ways we can't foresee. You have endured more than most, with grace. That matters. That will carry you forward." His words were simple, but they settled over me like a blanket, warming the parts of me I had thought frozen. I understood then that power isn't just in wealth, it's in resilience, in how quietly you rise after being knocked down. I began to step out into the city again, walking along streets I had once loved with a new awareness. Everything looked the same, but I saw it differently. The sounds, the lights, the people, life had gone on as relentless as ever, and yet I had survived its cruelties. I noticed small joys, the laughter of children in the park, the smell of coffee in the morning, the way the sun struck the windows of high-rise buildings in the evening. These little moments reminded me that life, even after heartbreak, was still full of beauty. And in those quiet reflections, I realized something crucial. My worth was not defined by betrayal, by wealth, or by the mistakes of others. My worth was in my own heart, in how I chose to face the world, and in the love I gave and preserved, not as a possession, but as a testament to my humanity. Gianna eventually stepped back from my life, understanding that I needed space, and I allowed her to. There was no dramatic confrontation, no angry words thrown into the air, just silence, and the understanding that sometimes love is letting go even when your heart aches to hold on. I continued my work, my small apartment, now a place of quiet reflection rather than sorrow. I met friends again, connected with people who valued honesty and warmth over wealth or appearances. I found joy in simple things, cooking meals for myself, taking walks at dusk, listening to music that touched my soul. Slowly, steadily, I began to rebuild not just my life, but my sense of self. And through it all, I learned the most profound lesson of all. Love cannot be measured by money, by status, or by appearances. Love is fragile, yes, and capable of causing unbearable pain. It teaches patience, resilience, and above all, the quiet dignity of living with truth, even when the truth hurts. There was no revenge, no dramatic confrontation, no cruel justice. Instead, there was understanding of human imperfection, of fear, of mistakes, and of the limits of what one heart can endure. In embracing that, I found something stronger than anger or resentment. Peace. Peace with myself, with my choices, and with the love I had carried, even when it was broken. In the stillness of my apartment, as the city hummed softly outside, I realized that the storm had passed. I had survived the heartbreak, not because the pain was gone, but because I had learned to carry it with grace. And in that grace, I discovered the quiet power of a heart that remains whole, even after it has been shattered. Time passed, quietly and steadily. The mornings no longer felt heavy with dread, and the nights were no longer filled with the weight of unanswered questions. Life had moved on, as it always does, and I had moved with it slowly, carefully, with a heart that had been broken, but was learning to beat again with strength and clarity. I often think about Gianna and Jace, about the choices they made, and about the life that could have been. I don't dwell in anger or resentment. Those emotions would have kept me trapped in the past, in the pain of what I could not change. Instead, I choose reflection, understanding, and quiet acceptance. Life is not about punishing those who hurt us. It is about preserving our own dignity and learning to love ourselves even when the world feels cruel. I also think about my own heart, how resilient it is, and how deeply it can love without losing itself. I realize now that love is not about possession or certainty. It's about giving, trusting, and sometimes letting go when circumstances demand it. True love does not demand perfection, it demands courage, honesty, and compassion. First for yourself, and then for others. I have returned to the simple pleasures I once overlooked, the warmth of morning sunlight on my face, the quiet hum of the city streets, the small kindnesses of strangers, and the laughter of friends who remain through everything. These are the treasures that cannot be bought, measured, or stolen. They are proof that even after heartbreak, life is abundant, meaningful, and worth living fully. Sometimes, when the city lights shimmer in the evening, I close my eyes and remember the love I carried for Gianna. I do not regret it. It shaped me, taught me, and prepared me for a deeper understanding of life and human fragility. Betrayal, heartbreak, and disappointment are painful, yes, but they are also teachers. They show us who we are, who we can become, and what we truly value. And in that quiet reflection, I have found peace. I have learned that power is not in wealth or status, but in the ability to hold oneself with grace in the face of sorrow. I have learned that heartbreak does not diminish the capacity to love it, refines it, sharpens it, and allows it to endure with wisdom. In the end, the lesson is simple but profound. Life is fragile, love is precious, and wealth cannot measure the worth of a heart. True happiness comes not from possessions or illusions, but from the courage to face truth, the strength to heal, and the grace to move forward with dignity. So now, I live quietly, with my heart intact, aware of the fragility and beauty of life, and grateful for the lessons that even heartbreak can bring. And sometimes, in the stillness of a quiet evening, I smile to myself, knowing that I have survived and that survival is not just endurance, but the quiet triumph of love, understanding, and self-respect.